Here is a bulletin from CBS News. In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas.
Bravo and Delta companies spent the night in and around the church.
Presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Unchanging principles.
At this last presidential inauguration of the 20th century,
arriving at the Pentagon a short time ago, there was a huge plume of smoke which continues to rise from the west side of the Pentagon.
World is the expansion of freedom in all the world.
I spent 47 years in the business, in the photojournalism business, and really loved every minute of it. But my introduction to the newspaper business was really through my father, who was director of photography at the Philadelphia Inquirer for many years. And as a kid, I used to go to work with him once in a while, and I would end up in the darkroom with all the photographers printing their pictures on deadline, and they would eventually get so tired of me being in the darkroom, harassing them in a sense, that they'd take me and turn me upside down and put me in the print barrel. So I learned a lot about photography very quickly, head first. I started out working for United Press International out of Austin, Texas, and I spent my early years with them and did any number of things. I covered the political conventions, Kennedy assassination, covered the Vietnam War for them, and that's really how I got my start.
Being let out by Captain Fritz. There is the prisoner.
There is Lee Oswald.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's a man with a gun. It's absolute panic. Absolute panic here in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. Detectives have their guns drawn.
Did you see whether or not he was hit? He was hit, wasn't he?
He grabbed himself on the side and fell to the ground.
That was my understanding. We were, what, 4 feet away from him?
I was 5 feet in front of him when they shot.
What is your name?
Frank Johnston.
And you're with
UPI.
He did grab his stomach. I saw him grab his stomach.
Right from the side.
What happened was, on that Sunday, Bob Jackson and I were in the basement along with, well, several other news people. Tom Pettit from NBC and Izzy Bleckman from Movietone News, etc., and some NBC people. They brought Oswald out, and Bob was to my left, and Izzy was to my right, and then Ruby was to the right of Izzy. It was so fast, the whole episode. It was as quick as you could snap your fingers that Jack Ruby fired the gun. We were all thrown to the floor because they didn't know whether it was one of us. And the next thing I knew, I looked up. I was lying on the floor. I remember shooting some frames as I hit the floor, and I remember getting the frame of them grabbing the gun out of Ruby's hand. He tried to fire more than once, but the detective in the dark suit grabbed the gun between the hammer and the breech of the pistol. But that was really my first really big assignment, and it was an incredible one for us. I volunteered to go to Vietnam. I was always told never to volunteer. But being in the newspaper business and wire service business at that time, Vietnam was becoming a front page story every day. And I really wanted to go over and cover it as a photographer. I arrived there in December of '66, and I started out on the first operation in 1967. I was assigned to, or I was attached to the Marine Corps in I Corps, and Oh, I guess I had roughly 47 combat operations in that 13 months I was there. And one of the big operations that I went in on was on May the 15th, 1967. It was in a place called An Hoa, and An Hoa means Peace Church in Vietnamese. And I got helicoptered in on an empty medevac into a hot LZ zone. I couldn't have been on the ground more than 15 minutes. And one of the Marines on my left flank yelled to come that way because he saw a building on the other side that we could take refuge in. And we got into the tree line, and we got on the other side, and we were carrying our casualties to this building, and it turned out to be an old Catholic church. Got inside, and the enemy fought us up to the windows and the doors of the church. I mean, it was really pretty nasty. And they were also shelling us from the other side with artillery or mortar fire. And I really, at that point, didn't know what was happening. There was so much chaos. And I was photographing things that were going on inside the church. As we were being shelled, I had hit the floor because I thought that the next round was going to come in on us. And when I looked up, I was at the front edge of the altar of the church. And when I looked up, there was a Marine sitting there with his M16. He had the 1,000-yard stare. I looked at this man's face, and I was like startled by the look. And I remember I had a Leica around my neck, an M Leica. The light was not good in the church. It was pretty dark in there. And I remember it was a very slow shutter speed, and I shot it at f2.8 wide open. The Marine that I photographed and 3 other Marines that I was in the church with, we were the last guys out of there. And we all got off at Dong Ha, and fellow I photographed went this way, and I went the other way with a film to get it back to Saigon. And I never saw that Marine from that day on. And it really wasn't until 1985 I got a call from Rob Sutter from Atlanta, Georgia, and he'd seen the photo of the Marine in the church in a book about the Marine Corps, and it had my byline on it, and he contacted me and identified the photo as his brother, Richard, who had been killed about a week before he was supposed to come home after his 13-month tour in Vietnam. In 1998, Phil McCombs, writer for the Washington Post, and myself decided to do a 3-part series on the photograph. It wasn't until a few months later it ran and found out that the picture had been misidentified. And to make a long story short, we published the story in the Post, and the Learning Channel did a documentary on Vietnam and this photograph, and they identified Richard Sutter, and then they used this photograph that I shot, and they blew it up in USA Today, a full page, as a promo for the 4-hour series that they did. And they colorized it. A man by the name of Mike Tripp walks into his office up in Providence, Rhode Island, and he opened up USA Today, and he looked at it, and he picked up the phone and called the Learning Channel and asked if he could possibly get a print of the picture, and they wanted to know why. He said, well, because I was never able to get a copy of that picture because it was a picture of me in Vietnam, and of course they called me right away, and I called Mike Tripp up in Providence, and I wasn't sure, at that point in time, if he was on the same operation or not. Well, it turned out that Mike was shot down in the rice paddy the day before we got in there on a H-34 to pick up casualties, and he was one of the Marines that went inside that church, and he was the Marine I photographed up on the altar of the church with the 1,000-yard stare. I started with the Washington Post in 1968, in October of 68. I spent 35 years of my professional life covering Washington and national news for the Post. I was hired by Ben Bradley, really, and Dick Darcy, who was the director of photography at the paper. And first assignment I had for the Post was to go over and photograph Richard Nixon at the Hilton Hotel, right across the street from the paper. I made it with a longer lens from the front, below, of Nixon with his hands up, and it was like looking through his hands. And the Post published it the next morning out on the front page, and it was my first published picture with paper. The Post was really interested in developing this, the photographic end of it, into national news type operation. I was covering the White House on a daily basis besides the Hill, and there were a lot of things going on then. Of course, we had big stories beginning to happen here in Washington. The anti-war marches and the Vietnam, the GIs throwing their medals over at the fence up at the Capitol, all that. It was really an incredible period of time to be part of. And I covered the political conventions. I covered the candidates who ran for president. Watergate was another one. And I was always trying to come up with some different pictures of how to illustrate major stories in a little different way, than what we normally did. And it was an interesting period of time, and I just there was always something interesting going on in Washington. Although I never looked at myself as a Washington photographer totally, even though I worked for a newspaper here. I was always a field guy. I always liked to go to the field somehow, and I would, that's where I really felt I could really do my thing pretty much, where I wasn't relegated to a rope, behind a rope, or somebody timing me for 1 minute and 15 seconds. I had been covering the White House since, 6 years, when I came up with an idea. What if I went behind the scenes and captured all the things that go on in the White House to make the presidency function day in and day out, including the president, of course, and the family. But the president thought it was a great idea. And Haynes Johnston and I decided to do this book called The Working White House. So we got a book commitment, and I had 3 months to do this. And it was really interesting. As a photographer, even though people knew you in the press corps, it was a different situation when you crossed that line to go behind the scenes, because I found the people who worked there for many years were very protective of the president and his privacy. And it was very hard to get access at first until they realized that you were not doing a number. And these pictures were totally separate from the daily newspaper. I mean, this was the agreement, which once I crossed that line, everything I shot was on black and white film, Tri-X, shot it mostly with Leicas, and I was really very fortunate. The Ford family couldn't have been nicer to me. And David Kennerly, too. I mean, David didn't have to yield the right away either for me to come in. I mean, he really helped me out, and I'm eternally grateful to this day, because David was always willing to share with other photographers. Always.
Take our life from us. We laid it down. We got tired. We didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide, protesting the conditions of an inhumane world.
I'm in Washington. It's a Saturday night, and I went out with some friends until about 1 or 2 in the morning. And I got a call about 3:30. I'd just gotten to sleep, and they said, do you have your cameras with you? I said, yes, I do. And they said, well, we're going to ship you with some post people on a charter flight out of National Airport down to a place called Georgetown, Guyana. And I said, what's going on? They said, well, we're not sure. We're not sure, but we have a reporter down there that we think has been killed with Congressman Ryan. So I had about 10 minutes to pack it up, and off I went for Georgetown, Guyana, and got down there, and the Minister of Information had a press conference and said that they didn't know what went on in Jonestown, but they thought Congressman Ryan was hurt and wounded, possibly, along with some other people. And everybody that was in the room decided that there would be a pool formed for photos, and the reporters would pick a reporter, and reporters picked Charlie Krause. And the photographers drew straws, and I drew the short straw on going in with Charlie Krause. And as we're flying in, we come over the compound, and it looked like a kid's summer camp. I looked down, and I saw this large group of people down there, and I thought, gee, that's really strange. It looks like they're having a picnic or an outing. And I didn't realize until we were almost overhead that nobody was moving on the ground. And I started a photograph on the way in, and helicopter dropped us off on the ground, and we walked into the compound. And the first group of people I ran into that I saw was on the other side of a short fence outside the pavilion area, which was the main rectangular building in Jonestown. Was a group of people with a child between them with sneakers on, and they were all dead. Nothing was moving. It was totally, totally silent. And I made my way into the compound, and the compound was just a sea of bodies, people. In that compound, arm in arm, they all had name tags on. And as I stepped between bodies to get into the inside of it, I looked to my right, and there was a big table with Dixie cups on it. They apparently dispensed theracene and cyanide in these Dixie cups, which killed you instantly. And they probably, I think they had 900 and some odd people stacked out in that, behind that pavilion area. There was a throne that Jones sat in to address his followers, and overhead, over the throne, was a sign that said, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it." It was chilling. It was just chilling. In 1982, I was doing a lot of financial stories for the Washington Post, and I was traveling across the United States from time to time on assignments, and I was beginning to see families hitchhiking and living in campgrounds. And then I started to see food lines, a lot of the homeless in different cities. And I'm traveling across the country, and I'm putting all this together in my head, and I'm looking back at the FSA days, Farm Security Agency days. When I was a kid, I'd look through these books, Arthur Rothstein's pictures, and all the photographers Dorothea Lange, all of them that did this incredible documentation of the 30s. And I was beginning to see images like this across the United States. So I really was trying to figure out how I could document this and not be interrupted. I came across the Alicia Patterson Foundation. She was the owner of Newsday and had passed on, and they set a foundation up for journalists in her name to do a year's study of whatever they would apply for if they got the foundation grant. So I applied to go look at the social and economic changes and the homeless during those times. And luckily enough, some way, somehow, all the stars fell into the right orbit, and I got a year off to do this. And it was probably one of the most interesting years that I have spent in my professional life, because I did the farmers, I did the border between Mexico and Texas, I did the women miners, deep miners, which was really an interesting story, and I really focused in closely on one of the miners in particular, and I did the change in the automobile industry in Detroit, going from the regular production line to robotics. A lot of the workers were being replaced by robots at the time, and so they were going through a major transition themselves. And one of the more interesting parts of that too is Schwartz Creek, Michigan, which was they were burning toxic chemicals from the automobile plants in at the end of that town, and it was leaking into the water table of the people in that town, and a lot of people were dying from cancer. And I came across that story on my way, my travels through that area, and they were evacuating people, and it was really chaos over in that area. And it became a major story. In fact, I think National Geographic did a piece on it in one of their issues at the time. But my year was fantastic. It was incredible, and I never felt like I was finished with it totally. And I hope to go back now after all these years and to try to trace some of the people that I had photographed and see where they are today. So all the circumstances, if I sat down today and I tried to explain the best way to do something, I'd be the last person, because it just it didn't happen that way with me. It was by sheer luck and timing, and you just have to have a will to want to pursue it, whatever you do in this business, and be be constant with the mission that you want to go on and you want to achieve, I guess. And I wasn't willing to take anything less if I could, and I didn't. I really didn't. And when I got there, I was in the middle of the war, and I remember the first operation I went out on, and it took me all of maybe 10 seconds to say, "Oh my God, what am I doing here? What did I do?" So, we all do that. We all do that from time to time, but when you have that camera around your neck and you're looking through that finder or that lens, it's an amazing thing. It really is. And we've talked about that. Other war photographers and myself have covered different conflicts, and there's that buffer zone between you and reality that's happening in front of you. It's a psychological thing. There's no doubt about it. And I just I could never quite understand it other than experiencing it and then realizing that little black box around you, between you and the subject, has a way of handling your emotions behind that finder, and you can function as a professional a little bit better that way. If I had been looking at it directly without a camera in front of me, I don't know whether I could have done a lot of that. I really don't. But having that black box around my neck and moving around and shooting is a great buffer zone to what you're dealing with sometimes.